I woke up on a Sunday in late August with rain tapping my apartment window and no particular reason to think the day would matter, which is usually exactly when it does. By noon, I was at the farmer's market 3 blocks from Ridgeline Community Hospital, standing in line for peaches, still in the grey hoodie I'd worn to bed, hair knotted on top of my head like a bird's nest I hadn't bothered to fix. 6 days off in a row does something to a person. You stop performing. You forget the version of yourself that other people see. Nadia? I turned around, holding a paper bag of peaches against my chest, and there was a man in a faded green t-shirt, sunglasses pushed up into dark hair, looking at me the way you look at something you've been picturing for a long time and can't quite believe is standing in front of you. It took me a second. It always takes a second when you meet someone outside the frame you knew them in. Then it clicked. The jawline, the low, steady voice, the small scar above his left eyebrow I used to check on every morning during vitals. Theo Marsh. Room 411. 9 months ago, give or take. "Oh my God," I said, and the peaches nearly went everywhere. You look like a person, a whole, upright person." He laughed, and it was such a different laugh than the one I remembered, the tight, careful one he used to give when the pain was worse than he'd admit. "Yeah. Funny how that works when you're not hooked up to anything." I'd been his nurse on the cardiac unit for 11 days back in November, after the kind of accident that puts a 34-year-old contractor in a hospital bed wondering if he'd ever climb a ladder again, let alone run. I remembered his chart better than I remembered some of my own relatives' birthdays. You do that. In this job, you carry pieces of strangers around in your head forever, whether you want to or not. I remembered him gritting his teeth through physical therapy and cracking jokes at 3 in the morning when neither of us could sleep. Him because of the pain. Me because the unit was quiet and boredom makes you talkative. I remembered the day he was discharged, how he'd stood at the nurse's station in street clothes for the first time, looking almost like a stranger, and said, "I don't know how to thank you people, to all of us, generally, the way patients do," and then he was gone, and that was supposed to be that. There's a rule, unspoken but iron, about not crossing that line while someone's still your patient. I'd never once considered it while he was in that bed. Not seriously. You don't let yourself. You build a wall out of vitals and med schedules and the particular exhaustion of a 12-hour shift, and the wall holds because it has to. But he wasn't my patient anymore. Hadn't been for the better part of a year. "You live around here?" I asked, mostly to have something to say that wasn't the 6 other things crowding my throat. Not exactly. I moved to Fairview after everything. Better commute for work, cheaper rent, whole fresh start thing. He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture I remembered from 411, usually right before he said something he'd rehearsed. "I come to this market sometimes." "Actually, that's not true. I've come to this market 4 times this summer. I looked up your work schedule pattern once, which sounds insane when I say it out loud, and then I felt like a lunatic and stopped, and just started coming on Sundays hoping." I stood there with my peaches, rain starting to spit down again under the market's plastic awning, and felt something in my chest do a slow, unfamiliar turn. Not shock, exactly. More like recognition of a shape I hadn't let myself examine too closely 9 months ago, when I was too busy being professional to notice I was also being careful in a different way, the way you're careful around something breakable you like too much. "That's either the most romantic thing anyone said to me or the most concerning," I said. "I've been told it's both." He smiled, but under it was something raw. "Look, I'm not going to pretend I don't know how this sounds. You took care of me when I couldn't feed myself with my right hand. You listened to me complain about physical therapy for 11 days straight. I know that's not the same as actually knowing someone, so I'm not asking you to remember me as anything other than a guy who used to page you for ice chips at 2 a.m. You paged me a lot for ice chips." "I was manipulating the system for company," he admitted. "I want to buy you a coffee. Not because of the hospital. Because I've thought about you basically every week since November, and I finally decided that was either something worth saying out loud or something I needed to actively get over, and I couldn't get over it, so. I want to tell you I had some wise, composed response ready. I didn't. I stood in a farmer's market holding fruit, thinking about how many times a shift like that trains you to keep a professional distance, and how strange it is when the person on the other side of that distance turns out to still be standing there once the walls come down on their own. There's a coffee place 2 stalls down, I said. It's not very good coffee. I don't actually like coffee, he said. I just wanted an excuse. We sat under the awning while the rain thickened into something real, and he told me about the fresh start. A job doing custom carpentry now, instead of the roofing work that had put him in that bed. How his right hand still ached in cold weather, but held a hammer fine. How his mother cried actual tears when he walked into her kitchen unassisted for Thanksgiving. I told him things I don't usually tell almost strangers, about the burnout that had nearly pushed me off the floor last spring, about how some patients you carry with you and some you don't, and how I hadn't planned on telling him which kind he'd been. Which kind was I? He asked. The kind I looked up on discharge day, made sure his outpatient PT referral actually went through, and then thought about more than was professionally advisable. He went quiet for a second, turning his cup in his hands. I used to think about asking for your number before I left. I had it half planned. Then I thought, she's just doing her job. She's kind to everyone. Don't be that guy who reads too much into a nurse being decent to him while he's scared out of his mind. I wasn't kind to everyone the way I was kind to you, I said, and it surprised me how easily it came out. Months of not admitting it to myself, apparently having worn a groove straight to my mouth. Here's the part I keep turning over. The part I imagine other people who've worked a caregiving job might turn over too, if they let themselves. Where exactly is the line between compassion, that's just your job, and something that means more? And how are you supposed to know the difference while you're still inside it, still wearing the badge, still bound by every rule that exists precisely because? That line gets blurry for good reason? I don't think there's a clean answer. I think you just wait. You let time do the sorting the rules can't do for you. If it's still there once the reason for the wall is gone, maybe that tells you something true. It was still there. 9 months of quiet, unspoken waiting, on both sides, apparently, and it was still there, stubborn as a scar that fades but doesn't disappear. We ended up walking the whole length of the market twice, peaches forgotten and going soft in the bag. And when he asked, finally, straightforwardly, if he could take me to dinner sometime, that wasn't a coincidence. I said yes before I'd even finished deciding, which told me everything I needed to know about how long I'd already decided. 6 weeks later, he showed up at the hospital gift shop, of all places, holding a single sunflower and looking sheepish about it, because apparently even carpenters get nervous walking back into a building that once nearly broke them, just to surprise the woman working 3 floors up. My co-worker Denny leaned over the nurse's station and said, "Lo? Isn't that the guy from 411 last fall?" And I said, "Yeah," and didn't explain any further, because some things don't need explaining, they just need to be lived. I think about that scar above his eyebrow sometimes, faded now to almost nothing, the same way the 11 days I spent as his nurse have faded into something else entirely, not erased, just changed shape, the way a wound does when it finally gets the chance to heal into something you're glad you kept.